Beneath the desert wind and sandstone columns of Karnak lies a second temple, one made of water, channels and basins, embankments and causeways. A secret landscape engineered to mirror the moment of creation itself. For 3,000 years, priests and pharaohs shaped this ground not only with stone, but with currents, floods, and sacred lakes. Today, archaeologists are reading the sands and the subsoil to reveal something astonishing. Karnak may have stood on or been framed by a deliberate sacred island, a ritual world set apart from mortal land. If true, it changes how we see Thebes, the gods of Egypt, and the power of the king. Karnak isn't one temple. It's a city of sanctuaries, the precinct of Amun-Ra, the vast great hypostyle hall, the sacred lake of Amun, the precinct of Mut with her own crescent-shaped Ishiru, and the lunar child god Khonsu's precinct, each an axis of myth. Over 2 square kilometers of pylons, obelisks, colonnades, and courts grew here over 1,500 years. Every pharaoh left a mark. But beneath those monuments lies an older plan, a sacred geography staged with water, the enduring architecture of divine power. Karnak's existence, from the Middle Kingdom around 2055 BCE right through to the Roman period, isn't just a testament to building skill, it's a testament to unwavering theological commitment. The site's formal name, Opet Festival, meaning the most select of places, clearly indicates its profound importance, setting it apart from all other earthly sites. This name, found inscribed on countless blocks and stelae, was not a casual title, but a declaration of the complex's role as the linchpin of the cosmos. To the Egyptians, Opet Festival was the physical manifestation of divine order, Ma'at, in the realm of Thebes. The sheer scale of construction at Karnak is almost impossible to grasp. It covers approximately 250 acres, an area that could easily contain all of Rome's major classical temples. Consider the great hypostyle hall, begun during the reign of Horemheb and finished under Seti I and Rameses II. This single structure, a colossal forest of stone, houses 134 columns, the tallest of which stand 21 meters, 69 feet high, with a circumference so wide that a dozen people could link hands around them. These weren't merely supports, they were symbolic representations of the marshlands of creation, with the papyrus bundle and lotus capitals evoking the first plants to emerge from the primeval waters. The scale was designed to overwhelm, to place the visitor not in a building, but within a monumental, sacred landscape. Rameses II, one of the most prolific builders, added significantly to the temple, including the colossal statues and the first court. Yet, every addition was seamlessly integrated into the existing theological and architectural plan. The sequence of pylons, massive, tapering gateways, was not random. They were carefully aligned and numbered, leading the worshipper deeper, past progressively older and holier spaces, culminating in the dark, sealed sanctuary of Amun-Ra. This progression was a physical metaphor for the journey back to the moment of creation. With the temple's floor level gradually rising, the further one moved toward the sanctuary, mimicking the Benben mound rising from the flood. The complex is fundamentally organized around the Theban triad, Amun, Mut, and their son, Khonsu. This family unit was central to the religious and political life of the New Kingdom. The precinct of Mut, situated to the south, was accessible via a long processional avenue lined with criosphinxes, sphinxes with ram's heads, linking it to Amun's main temple. Mut's temple, focused on her role as the terrifying lioness goddess, was centered around the Ishiru Lake. This lake's distinctive crescent shape is highly significant. It directly evokes the lunar crescent, linking Mut to the cyclical nature of time, fertility, and the moon god Khonsu. More than a bathing place, the Ishiru was a giant, ceremonial altar for the manifestation of the goddess's power. Mut's name itself can be translated as mother, and her complex was the cosmic womb of Thebes. The precinct of Khonsu, to the southwest of the main Amun enclosure, was dedicated to the moon god, often depicted as a youth or child. Khonsu was associated with time, healing, and lunar cycles. His temple, though smaller, follows the same cosmic logic, with a defined axis leading to his own sanctuary. This structural connection reinforces the divine family and its complete control over all aspects of the natural and cosmic world, from the creation flood, Amun, to the fertile mother, Mut, and the passage of time, Khonsu. The key to understanding Karnak's secret lies in its geological context. The temples were built on the Nile's alluvial plain, a constantly changing landscape molded by the annual flood. For millennia, the Nile was not a single predictable river. It was a vast network of braided channels, marshes, and oxbow lakes that shifted course over time. Thebes, ancient Wasit, was situated to utilize these water resources, but also had to contend with the instability of the ground. Archaeological research confirms that during the New Kingdom, a major side channel of the Nile, often called the Karnak Channel or the Channel of Amun, flowed significantly closer to the western walls of the temple complex than the modern river course. This side channel was instrumental in the concept of the sacred island. By dredging and embanking, the pharaohs and priests could stabilize this natural boundary, turning a fluid natural feature into a sacred defined barrier. This deliberate shaping of the fluvial environment transformed a floodplain into a ritual precinct, the islanded world where the king, the chosen intermediary, could access the gods. The architectural evidence, from the high protective walls to the specific alignment of the causeways, strongly suggests that the builders were not avoiding the water, but rather embracing and controlling it to fulfill a theological purpose. This manipulation of the landscape elevated Karnak from a collection of stone buildings to a hydrological machine designed for daily cosmic renewal. In Egyptian thought, the world began as a boundless dark flood, the Nun. From it rose the first mound of earth, the Benben, the godland on which life could stand. Temples recreated this moment. The sanctuary was that first island, rising from chaos. Water symbolized the primeval ocean. Islands symbolized creation and divine order. Within this theology, an island precinct was not a quirk, it was the point. The closer a temple came to modeling the island of creation, the nearer it drew the gods. In Egyptian thought, the world began as a boundless dark flood, the Nun. From it rose the first mound of earth, the Benben, the godland on which life could stand. Temples recreated this moment. The sanctuary was that first island, rising from chaos. Water symbolized the primeval ocean. Islands symbolized creation and divine order. Within this theology, an island precinct was not a quirk, it was the point. The closer a temple came to modeling the island of creation, the nearer it drew the gods. The deep cosmology of the Nun. The ancient Egyptian concept of the Nun is far more complex than a simple flood. It was the pre-existent void, a state of undifferentiated, dark, inert water that preceded existence itself. The Nun was the original chaos from which all life, all order, ma'at, had to be wrested. It wasn't just a watery mass, it embodied four dualistic forces of chaos. Endlessness, and Hauhet, darkness, Kuk and Kauket, hiddenness, concealment, Amun and Amaunet, and watery inertia, Nun and Naunet. The Nun, in fact, was the divine potential, the very substance of being before it manifested. When the sun god Atum-Ra initiated creation, he emerged from the Nun, landing on the first solid piece of land, the Benben, or primeval mound. This mound became the fixed point in the cosmos, the place where order conquered chaos. Every Egyptian temple, particularly its inner sanctuary, was conceptually and often physically built to represent this Benben. This explains the tradition of raising the floor level toward the sanctuary, creating a literal ascent from the lower, chaotic outer courts to the raised, sanctified island within. The idea of the sacred island thus becomes the central architectural metaphor. An island, by definition, is a piece of stable ma'at, order, surrounded by the fluid isfet, chaos. Building a temple on an island, or engineering a landscape to feel like an island, was an act of cosmic maintenance. The pharaoh, through his priests, was literally reenacting the first morning of creation with every sunrise and every ritual. The temple complex was a microcosm of the universe, where the border between the world of men and the world of the gods was thinnest, defined by the barrier of the sacred water. The significance of temple orientation and foundation rituals. The dedication of a temple was a monumental theological event that reinforced the island concept. The stretching the cord ritual, often performed by the pharaoh himself, was a critical ceremony for aligning the temple to the cardinal directions and the stars, ensuring its place within the cosmic order. Crucially, however, the foundation rituals always involved a significant connection to the land and the water. Texts speak of the pharaoh digging the foundation trenches and depositing foundation deposits that often included mud bricks, seeds, and sometimes even models of boats or tools, all symbolizing the fertility of the new ground and its emergence from the chaotic waters. In the specific context of Thebes, the temple foundations were not just dry ditches. They were likely dug to interact with the high water table and the ancient Nile channels, intentionally framing the structure within the water's domain. For Karnak, this foundation mythology is intensified by the unique role of Amun-Ra, who became the king of the gods during the New Kingdom. Amun, whose name means the Hidden One, was initially a local Theban deity who later syncretized with the sun god Ra. His rise to prominence meant that Karnak was not just a primeval mound, but the chief generator of life and creation for the entire empire. His temple was considered the pillar of the sky and the womb of the world. This immense theological weight mandated an equally grand and symbolic physical environment, hence the need for the encircling, defining water. The idea of the sacred water or island wasn't unique to Karnak, proving it was a core component of Egyptian religious thought. The lake of the pharaoh at Medinet Habu, Ramesses III's mortuary temple, and the lake surrounding the temple of Isis on Philae are later and smaller examples. Philae, in particular, was literally an island, deliberately chosen for the isolation and sanctity that the surrounding water provided. A more direct parallel is the architecture of the mortuary temple of Hatshepsut at Deir el-Bahari. While not fully an island, its lower terraces were accessed by a long processional way that led to a canal and port connected to the Nile. This water access was essential for the annual transport of the divine barks, reinforcing the notion that the temple's sacred events had to be conducted via water transport, a ritual crossing from the mundane to the divine. These parallels underscore that the water at Karnak was not simply a convenient natural resource. It was a theological requirement. It functioned as a liminal space, a threshold that had to be crossed. Crossing the water symbolized the rebirth of the god, the king, and the cosmos itself. The physical act of embarking and disembarking from a sacred barge was an active participation in the myth of creation. This is why the geoarchaeological evidence of controlled channels and engineered banks at Karnak is so important. It transforms what appears to be a natural setting into a fully integrated, massive, sacred machine for generating order and power. We still see these waters today. The sacred lake of Amun gleams like a jewel. Rectangular, lined with stone steps for priestly ablution, night sky mirrored in its surface. In the precinct of Mut, a moon-shaped Ishiru lake curves around the temple like a crescent embrace. The functional theology of the sacred lakes. The sacred lake of Amun is perhaps the most visible evidence of Karnak's water theology. Built largely by Thutmose III, c. 1479-1425 BCE, it is a meticulously planned, artificial body of water measuring roughly 120 meters long by 77 meters wide. Its construction was a feat of engineering, requiring the excavation of massive amounts of earth and the lining of the basin with carefully cut stone blocks, likely to prevent seepage and maintain a stable water level regardless of the seasonal Nile fluctuation. This lake served multiple, overlapping purposes, none of which were purely secular. Ritual purity. Wab. The stone steps leading down into the water facilitated the daily ablutions of the priests, who had to be ritually pure, wab, to enter the inner sanctuary and attend to the god. Purity meant shedding the isfet of the mortal world before approaching the mayat of the divine. The water, sourced directly from the Nile, was considered the pure essence of the nun. Solar cycle reenactment. The eastern shore of the lake was often associated with the rising sun and rebirth. Every morning, the priests would move from the darkness of the temple's inner chambers to the light of the lake's surface, mirroring the sun, god Ra's emergence from the primeval waters. The Bark and Hainu rites. Most significantly, the lake was the staging ground for miniature ritual boat processions. During certain festivals, smaller, portable barks containing the god's image would be launched onto the lake. This was a direct, contained reenactment of the sun god's daily voyage across the sky, the boat of millions of years, and the first voyage of creation. A smaller, man-made version of the primeval ocean was a vital element in daily temple operations. The Crescent of Mut, Ishiru. The Ishiru Lake in the precinct of Mut presents a distinctly different, yet equally profound, hydrological concept. Unlike Amun's rectangle, representing order and the fixed cosmos, Mut's lake is crescent-shaped, often described as C-shaped or horseshoe-shaped, directly symbolizing the moon and the cyclical power of the mother goddess. The Ishiru Lake was a powerful focal point for the Festival of Mut. It was frequently dredged and maintained to keep its ritual significance. The presence of hundreds of statues of the goddess Sekhmet, Mut's ferocious aspect, found around the Ishiru suggests a deep connection to rituals of calming the goddess's rage and averting plague or chaos. The water, in this context, was not just the primordial ocean, but a barrier to chaos, a vessel for appeasement, and a mirror for the celestial cycles of the moon, which Mut embodied. The Ishiru also reinforces the island concept for Mut's precinct itself. By surrounding the sanctuary on three sides with the curving water and connecting the enclosure to the rest of the complex via carefully placed causeways, the architects consciously created a distinct, isolated, and sacred island for the Great Mother of Thebes. The processional way, arteries of the sacred landscape. The connections between the temples, Karnak to Mut, Karnak to Luxor, were not mere roads. They were sacred arteries built to manage both human and divine traffic. The most famous is the Avenue of Sphinxes, linking Karnak to Luxor Temple, about 2.5 kilometers, 1.5 miles away. This causeway, lined by over 700 sphinxes, was the ceremonial route for the Opet Festival. Geoarchaeological evidence confirms that this causeway was often built upon or adjacent to a major navigable canal or side channel of the Nile. The path the people took was dry land. The path the gods took was the sacred water. The causeway itself, often built with a robust foundation of sand, gravel, and stone, needed to be raised significantly to remain dry and stable during the annual Nile inundation. This engineering choice is a critical clue. The priests and pharaohs were consciously creating a ridge or an embankment that kept the procession of men above the natural floodwaters, while simultaneously ensuring the adjacent canal remained deep enough for the heavy, elaborate bark of Amun to sail unimpeded. The causeway and the canal were two sides of the same sacred coin, one for mortals, one for the gods. The causeways thus functioned as umbilical cords connecting the holy sites. Their engineering demonstrates an active management of the water table, the flood season, and the underlying geology. They were designed not to defy the water, but to control the boundaries between the sacred land and the ritual water, making the entire Theban landscape a single, interconnected theological machine, where the journey of the god was the key to the annual renewal of the world. The engineering ensured that myth was made manifest, and that the annual spectacle of the Opet Festival could be staged with divine perfection. How do we prove a hidden island? You don't just dig, you scan, core, and model. Geoarchaeologists map subsurface layers with ground-penetrating radar. They drill sediment cores along transects to taste the buried landscape, sand, silt, organics. Microscopic pollen and diatoms reveal ancient water bodies. Satellite and paleo-hydrology models track old Nile channels that shifted over millennia. Results from Thebes suggest a complex floodplain. Channels curving, silts pooling, margins rising. Temple builders worked with that living terrain, then shaped it further, dredging basins, revetting banks, cutting canals, raising mounds. Piece by piece, the data points toward an islanded precinct, water on multiple sides, connected by causeways. A world deliberately set apart. The tools of subsurface revelation. Geoarchaeology is the essential discipline for unlocking Karnak's secret. Traditional archaeology, focused on stone and objects, can only reveal what was built above the ground. Geoarchaeology, using advanced non-invasive techniques, tells us about the landscape before and during construction and how the builders interacted with it. GPR is a crucial starting point. It works by sending electromagnetic pulses into the ground and measuring the time it takes for the signal to bounce back off different subsurface layers. A key difference in the subsurface of Karnak is the clear distinction between massive stone foundations or man-made gravel and sand fill, used for causeways and raised mounds, and water-saturated silt or clay-rich flood deposits, indicating ancient channels, lakes, or marshes. GPR maps produce slices of the buried landscape, revealing anomalies that appear as linear features, ancient channels, or large, deep depressions, dredged basins, beneath the seemingly flat, modern surface. Early GPR surveys around the temple walls have indeed shown clear evidence of deep, large-scale cuts and infill that are inconsistent with a simple, dry building site. This is the tasting phase. An auger or core drill is used to extract long cylindrical samples of earth, sometimes reaching depths of 10 to 15 meters. These cores are then analyzed in a lab. The stratigraphy, the order and composition of the layers, tells a story of deposition. Coarse sands and gravels often indicate high-energy river channels. Fine, dark, laminated silts point to slow-moving, standing water, marshes or lakes. Thick layers of clean sand, gravel, and rubble overlaid on organic silt are the smoking gun for man-made construction. It represents the fill material the Egyptians used to raise and stabilize the temple foundations above the flood. In key locations around Karnak's perimeter, cores have consistently revealed multiple layers of aquatic sediments directly underlying the massive temple platform, followed by a thick cap of imported, non-local filler pattern that only makes sense if the builders were converting a wet area, a channel or marsh, into a dry, raised platform. To understand where the water used to be, researchers turn to paleo-hydrology. This involves using geological principles and satellite imagery, looking for subtle elevation changes and linear soil differences to reconstruct the ancient course of the Nile and its side channels. The Nile is an inherently restless river, constantly changing its path over thousands of years due to massive annual silt deposition. Historical texts, while rare, also provide clues. Temple inscriptions sometimes mention the dredging of canals or the building of embankments, indicating that water management was a major pharaonic responsibility. For example, records from the reign of the Libyan kings show attempts to clear the processional causeway and its adjacent canal, proving that maintaining the navigable depth was a continuous, costly effort, essential for the Opet Festival and the annual ritual renewal. This suggests the canal system was a design feature, not an abandoned natural stream. The builders as engineers. The evidence overwhelmingly shows that the Karnak site was not an accidental dry spot, but a low-lying, naturally wet area, a complex of seasonal channels and back swamps. The builders did not choose the site for its dryness. They chose it for its cosmic proximity to the Nile, Nun, and its ability to be framed by water. The process was a monumental task of civil engineering. Dredging. Channels and basins were deliberately deepened to ensure year-round navigability, even during the lowest water periods. This was essential for the large, heavy sacred barks. Revetting and embanking. The banks of the newly defined channels and the temple edges were reinforced with stone or compacted earth, revetted, to prevent erosion and stabilize the sacred island's boundary. Filling and raising. The temple platform itself was raised multiple meters above the average flood level, using millions of tons of imported sand and rubble. This act of filling was the physical equivalent of creating the Ben mound, the sanctuary rising from the chaos of the flood. The resulting picture is not a temple built next to the water, but a temple platform framed by water on multiple sides. This island-like precinct, connected to the wider Theban metropolis only by engineered causeways, would have created a visceral, powerful experience for the worshipper, making the theological narrative of creation an inescapable, physical reality. Imagine Karnak not merely as a block of stone on land, but as a sanctum encircled by water, a controlled, sacred archipelago. Consider 4 clues. 1. The geometry of lakes, Amun's rectangle and Mut's crescent, looks intentional, not accidental. 2. Causeways behave like land bridges, macadamized spines over lower, wetter ground. 3. Sediment cores around temple margins often show aquatic layers capped by fill, like water spaces that were later stabilized. 4. Egyptian mythic logic, the sanctuary as the first mound, the precinct as the island of the gods. When the ritual story, the monuments, and the subsurface all point the same way, a picture emerges. Karnak as a sacred island complex, engineered to enact creation every day. Unpacking the 4 pillars of evidence. The conclusion that Karnak was an engineered sacred island rests on the convergence of these 4 distinct lines of evidence: architecture, engineering, geology, and theology. They form a robust model that reframes our understanding of the site. 1. The geometry of intent. The meticulously planned shapes of the 2 major sacred lakes are a forceful argument against a natural origin. Natural lakes on the Nile floodplain are typically irregular, sinuous, or oxbow-shaped, conforming to the meanders of the river. Amun's rectangular lake. A rectangle is a symbol of order, structure, and cosmic containment, a temenos or sacred enclosure. The precise right angles, the deep stone lining, and the steps speak of human planning on a massive scale. It is a controlled, ordered piece of the nun. Chaos brought to heel and packaged for ritual use. The exact east-west alignment of its long axis may even relate to the daily passage of the sun. Mut's crescent Isheru. The crescent is an equally powerful and deliberate symbol, tied directly to Mut, the moon, and cyclical time. It mirrors the Isheru lakes found at other Mut temples, demonstrating that this shape was a canonical architectural requirement for the goddess, not a geological accident. If these were mere natural water bodies, their geometry would be random. Their perfect theological shapes confirm their ritual function and engineering intent. 2. The engineered spines, causeways, and land bridges. A key functional requirement of a sacred island is controlled access. The causeways at Karnak, particularly the Avenue of Sphinxes and the internal causeways linking the various precincts, were designed to manage that transition from the secular to the holy. Geoarchaeological surveys confirm that these causeways were deliberately raised structures. They were constructed from vast amounts of imported, well-draining material, sand, crushed limestone, and taffel, a local hard-packed mudstone, to create a high, dry spine across the lower-lying, often marshy or channel-crossed floodplain. This meant that even during the peak of the Nile flood, the causeway remained a dry, ceremonial path. Critically, these causeways were often designed with built-in sluice gates or drainage features that allowed water to be controlled beneath them, preventing a complete separation of the water bodies while maintaining the dryness of the path. The causeways were the liminal bridges, the single path of Ma'at, order, leading to the island, while the surrounding water remained the symbolic nun, chaos. The entire structure was a monumental engineering compromise, allowing the sacred water to frame the complex without isolating it completely from human access. 3. The geological signature, aquatic layers capped by fill. The most compelling hard evidence comes from the sediment cores. In multiple locations along the imagined boundaries of the sacred island, particularly to the west, north, and south of the Amun precinct, geologists have repeatedly found a characteristic stratigraphic sequence that documents the transition from a natural wet landscape to an engineered dry one. Lowest layer, coarse Nile sand, gravel, the natural riverbed. Middle layer, dark, organic rich silts and clays containing diatoms, microscopic algae that only live in water, and pollen from marshland plants, reeds, papyrus. This proves the area was a slow-moving channel or marsh. Upper layer, massive, sterile, imported sand and rubble fill, the Benben Mound Foundation. This sequence is the blueprint of the primeval mound. The ancient Egyptians took a naturally wet, low-lying piece of the floodplain, the watery chaos, defined its boundaries, and then buried the aquatic layer under a monumental layer of fill to create the raised, stable island platform for the temple. This geological signature proves the island was not an existing landform, but an engineered foundation. 4. Mythic logic and Theban theology. The ultimate proof lies in the Egyptian worldview. In a civilization obsessed with the annual renewal of life and the victory of order over chaos, the engineering simply gives physical form to the theology. The very concept of a temple, Hut Necher, mansion of the god, was tied to the creation myth. By surrounding the precinct with the symbolic nun, the priests guaranteed that every ritual performed inside, from the daily feeding of the god to the great annual festivals, was a reenactment of Zep Tepi, the first time of creation. The pharaoh was not just walking into a temple, he was stepping onto the Benben Mound, performing his duties in the original consecrated space of cosmic origin. This constant ritual renewal of creation was not just about piety, it was about sustaining Ma'at for the entire empire. If the temple, the cosmic engine, was correctly set in its island environment, then the Nile would flood correctly, the crops would grow, and the sun would rise. The kingdom would prosper. The engineering was a sacred technology vital to the stability of the state. The convergence of these four clues, perfect geometry, engineered access, clear geological transformation, and absolute theological necessity, makes the case for Karnak as an engineered sacred island complex overwhelmingly strong. No event reveals this better than Opet. Each year, statues of Amun, Mut, and Khonsu embarked on a waterborne procession from Karnak to Luxor. Crowds thronged the banks, drums boomed, priests chanted, "Why water?" Because water is rebirth. Amun's boat crossing reenacted that first emergence from the deep. The king met the god at Luxor to receive power renewed. His divine right refloated, as it were, on the sacred tide. An islanded Karnak would have turned the whole precinct into an amphitheater of creation, the gods literally sailing from the island of the divine to the city of men. The grand spectacle. The Opet Festival. The Opet Festival was the most important religious event in the Theban calendar during the New Kingdom. It took place over a period that could last from 11 days to nearly a month during the inundation season, Akhet, typically around the second month of the year. Its fundamental purpose was the reunification of the Ka, life force, of the reigning pharaoh with the Ka of Amun-Ra, ensuring the king's divine legitimacy for another year. The journey itself was meticulously planned. Departure. The portable statues of the Theban triad, Amun, Mut, and Khonsu, were brought out of their inner sanctuaries at Karnak and placed into their respective magnificent, gold-laden ritual barks, the Henu boat for Amun, and similar sacred vessels for Mut and Khonsu. The sail. The barks were placed on a major canal parallel to the Avenue of Sphinxes and sailed upstream, south, to Luxor Temple. The boats were often towed by smaller tugs or by teams of priests and noblemen walking along the riverbank and pulling the boats with thick ropes. The arrival. The gods arrived at Luxor, where the pharaoh participated in secret, transformative rituals in the inner sanctum, culminating in his divine renewal. The return. The deities then sailed back, often accompanied by massive public feasting and celebration. The theological necessity of the water journey. The water journey was the ritual core of the festival. It was not a logistical choice. It was a theological mandate. The journey from Karnak, Amun's house, to Luxor, Amun's southern harem, Ipet Reset, was a symbolic journey of gestation and rebirth. The Nile as the pathway. The river canal represented the celestial river, or the Nun itself. Amun, sailing in his bark, was reenacting the nightly journey of the sun god Ra, traveling through the darkness, the waters of the underworld, the Duat, to be reborn at dawn. By sailing on the water, the gods were literally recharging their divine energy from the primeval source. The king's rebirth. At Luxor, the king entered the birth room, Mamisi, and other sacred spaces where he was believed to confront the Ka of Amun, effectively being reconceived as the god's son. The divine power that flowed through the god during the water journey was transferred to the king, who emerged with his right to rule divinely validated and his powers cosmically renewed. The sailing was a massive
performance of the transfer of supreme power. The role of an islanded Karnak. An islanded Karnak complex transforms the Opet Festival from a simple journey into a cosmic drama with a defined starting point. If Karnak was a sacred island, then the gods were not sailing from a mere building on a plain. They were sailing from the physical embodiment of the primeval mound, the Benben, the single spot on Earth where creation began. The threshold, the moment the portable barks were placed on the water of the canal, having been carried through the pylons of the temple's dry, raised island, was the moment they crossed the threshold into the Nun. The journey began from the state of order, Ma'at, to briefly re-enter the chaotic potential of the Nun, only to return reborn. The water was the necessary transitional medium. Public witness, the people thronging the dry banks were witnessing the gods' majestic departure and return. The spectacle of the colossal sacred barks, shimmering with gold and filled with the veiled image of the god, being towed down the deep, stable channel adjacent to the monumental causeway, would have been a profoundly moving, powerful, and politically unifying sight. It visually cemented the idea that Thebes was the center of the universe, and the king was the indispensable link to the gods. Water is spectacle and power. If the priesthood could flood, drain, or route water on cue, they could stage controlled miracles. Temple gates open, hymns rise, the god's bark appears on shining waters, candles glint, and the people witness the world remade. Logistics hid behind liturgy, dikes, sluices, dredging crews, seasonal timing. The engineering vanish behind ritual. By design, an island precinct elevates priests and king alike. Only the sanctified cross the liminal water. Only the chosen step onto the land of the gods. The priesthood, masters of sacred hydraulics. The priesthood of Amun in Thebes was arguably the most powerful religious and economic institution in ancient Egypt, particularly during the New Kingdom. Their wealth drawn from vast estates, mining rights, and tribute rivaled that of the royal administration. This immense power was fundamentally rooted in their exclusive control over the daily ritual and the staging of major festivals. The control of the sacred water was a primary mechanism for asserting and maintaining this power. The priests were, by necessity, the master hydraulic engineers of the temple complex. The sluice gate technology. To maintain the water frame boundary of the island and the depth of the sacred lake's canals, the priest had to actively manage the water flow. This involved the use of sluice gates, dikes, and embankments. Sluices, which are essentially sliding gates or channels for controlling water flow, allowed the priesthood to isolate the sacred lake from the fluctuating Nile during low water periods to maintain a stable water level for ablutions and small bark processions, flood or drain ritual areas on a precise schedule for specific ceremonies, maintain the necessary depth in the main processional canal for the Opet bark, possibly by diverting water from another channel or controlling silt buildup. The ritual of appearance, the concept of the controlled miracle is central. Imagine a massive procession. The crowds are gathered along the causeway and banks watching the water. At the precise moment dictated by the liturgy, the waters near the temple gates begin to ripple and rise slightly, and the magnificent bark, previously hidden in a purwer, a sacred boathouse, appears to rise or emerge from the water. This was not magic, but meticulously managed hydraulics. The priests, by opening or closing a hidden sluice, could control the spectacle, making the appearance of the god seem like a spontaneous, divine manifestation, rather than a logistical maneuver. The engineering was the invisible hand of the divine, liminality, and exclusivity. The water boundary served a crucial political and religious function, exclusivity. The crossing. The island precinct made the crossing of the water a powerful act of liminal transition, the movement from the profane world to the consecrated world. Only the king, as the chief priest, and the highest-ranking ritually pure priests were permitted to cross this sacred barrier to access the inner sanctum sanctorum. The common populace remained on the outer dry banks of the processional way. Hierarchical space. The entire layout of Karnak enforced a rigid hierarchy. The exterior of the temple, with its massive public courts, was for the populace. The successive pylons and walls, coupled with the water barrier, created zones of increasing sanctity. The water itself was the most powerful demarcation line, stating that the island was off-limits, the At-Netjer, place of the god. The priests, who alone could navigate this terrain, became the indispensable intermediaries, their power secured by their physical control of the access points. Barred the pharaonic investment. The engineering effort, the constant dredging, the building of embankments, the maintenance of sluices, required a massive centralized investment of labor, time, and resources. This financial burden underscores the political necessity of the sacred island. The pharaohs funded these projects not just out of piety, but out of self-preservation. By funding the massive dredging of the Opet Canal or the rebuilding of the sacred lake's revetments, the king fulfilled his role as the protector of Ma'at, cosmic order, secured the cooperation of the powerful Amun priesthood, ensured the successful staging of the Opet Festival, which publicly renewed his divine right to rule. The engineering of the sacred island was, therefore, an act of royal propaganda on a colossal, architectural scale, turning the land itself into a declaration of the pharaoh's divine mandate. In Thebes, the divine family radiates meaning: Amun, hidden and unseeable; Mut, mother and moon; Khonsu, the traveler in the night sky. Mut's crescent Ishiru Lake likely embodied lunar cycles, her waters a mirror to the heavens. Amun's vast lake stood as the Nun, the cosmic sea; his sanctuary, the first mound. Khonsu's precinct carried the quiet geometry of night voyages. Together, they turned Karnak into a cosmic model: 3 precincts, 3 waters, 1 theology, creation renewed through ritual. An island precinct makes this model visceral. You felt the Nun around you, and the sanctuary rising from it. The divine topology of the Theban triad. The concept of the engineered island complex integrates the distinct but interconnected theologies of the Theban triad into a unified physical landscape. Amun, the Benben and the Nun Amun, as the hidden one, and later, Amun-Ra, the king of the gods, represented the mysterious, self-created force of life. His massive central precinct was the chief Benben mound. The sacred lake of Amun was the surrounding Nun. This physical relationship reinforces Amun's theology. The creator must emerge from the primeval waters. The temple itself becomes the cosmic generator, the point of origin. The very axis of Amun's temple, running generally east-west, connecting the rising and setting sun, links his island mound to the daily solar cycle of creation and death. Furthermore, the immense storage of the sacred lake could have represented the boundless, eternal nature of the Nun, which always remains, even when the rest of the world is dry. The scale of his precinct reflects his status as the supreme, all-encompassing deity. Mut. The crescent and fertility Mut, meaning mother, was the female counterpart to Amun and was often linked to the fierce lioness goddess Sekhmet. Her crescent-shaped Ishiru Lake is the strongest piece of geometric evidence for intentional sacred geography. The crescent form directly connects her to Khonsu, the moon god, and the cycles of fertility and renewal. The moon, like the Nile, waxes and wanes. It represents cyclical life and death. The water of her Ishiru, encircling her temple, was a symbolic womb from which the life of Thebes, specifically the life force of the king, her divine son, was renewed. The crescent shape, viewed from above, would have been a massive, unmissable symbol visible to the gods, signifying that this was her consecrated space. The sheer number of Sekhmet statues found in the precinct suggests that rituals performed in the presence of the water were essential for containing Mut's destructive power and drawing out her life-giving maternal aspect, Khonsu. The traveler and the processional way Khonsu, of the sun, was associated with the moon, time, and healing. His precinct, though smaller, was vital. It often housed the final resting place for the barks of the triad during festivals. Khonsu's primary theological function in this context is as the traveler, the god who links the other two. His temple's position and its connection to the overall water system is no accident. He is the mediator who is carried on the processional way, bridging the physical space and theological function between his father, Amun, and his mother, Mut. His precinct, being nearest to the Luxor portion of the causeway, represents the successful completion of the cyclical journey and the reordering of time, his lunar association. His temple's sacred water would have been crucial for the final purification and preparation for the return journey. The visceral experience of sacred space. The true impact of the engineered island complex was the visceral experience it created for those permitted to enter or even witness it from afar. For the pharaoh and priests, crossing the water meant they were walking on the benben. They weren't just practicing a ritual, they were stepping into the first time. The sound of the water, the humidity, the reflection of the sun on the lake, the knowledge that they were physically isolated from the chaos of the city, all served to intensify the ritual and validate their sacred roles as stewards of the cosmos. For the public, the water was a magnificent barrier. The spectacle of the massive walls of the island rising from the depths of the canal, or the shimmering surface of the lake, would have created an awe-inspiring, intimidating effect. Karnak was not just a temple, it was a fortress of Ma'at, a celestial city made manifest, protected and defined by the primordial waters of creation. The entire landscape was a three-dimensional theological model, making the complex a living, breathing testament to the power of the gods and the stability of the Egyptian cosmos. If Karnak operated as a sacred island complex, then Egyptian religion wasn't just told, it was built. Priests didn't simply describe creation, they constructed it, with embankments and lakes and ritual waterways. It reframes pharaonic power, not only protector of Ma'at, but engineer of cosmic order. It reframes festivals, not parades on dry land, but sacred crossings. It even reframes archaeology. To understand temples, we must study the hydrology beneath them, the quiet architecture of water, the ancients used as a sacred technology. The new role of the king. Cosmic engineer. The evidence of an engineered island dramatically expands our view of pharaonic power and responsibility. The pharaoh was indeed the son of Ra, and the chief executor of Ma'at, truth, order, justice. However, the scale of the hydraulic engineering at Karnak adds the role of cosmic engineer. The king's duty was not merely to speak the words of the ritual, but to physically maintain the cosmic machine. This meant controlling the flood, ensuring the Nile's annual inundation was neither too high, causing destruction, nor too low, causing famine. The Karnak waterways were a localized expression of this larger duty. Managing silt and erosion, the constant backbreaking work of dredging the canals and revetting the banks was a direct royal responsibility, often boasted about in inscriptions. This wasn't just infrastructure, it was the ritualistic defeat of the chaos-bringing silt and erosion, the physical manifestation of Isfet threatening Ma'at. Mobilizing labor. The pharaoh's ability to command the massive labor forces needed for these projects was the ultimate demonstration of his divinely granted authority. The people's labor was literally building and maintaining the sacred foundation of the universe. The pharaoh was thus the grand designer, orchestrating the land and water to align with the heavens, making his power all-encompassing, spiritual, political, and material. Redefining ritual as engineering. This model changes the fundamental perception of Egyptian ritual. The actions of the priests and king were not solely acts of prayer or symbolic gesture, they were part of a larger engineering cycle essential for the rite's success. The Opet Festival becomes a sacred transit ritual. The bark crossing is not a parade, it is a literal crossing of the primordial waters. The success of the festival depended as much on the stability of the revetments and the depth of the channel as it did on the correct chanting of the hymns. The liturgical text was the design specification for the hydraulic work. This is the definition of sacred technology, the use of material science, hydraulic engineering, quarrying, masonry, not for economic or military gain but for purely cosmological purposes, to make the myth function and the god appear. This is why the engineering was so carefully hidden. The people were meant to see the miracle of the god's bark floating, not the sluice gates and the dredged mud. The technology was designed to disappear behind the divinity. A new chapter for archaeology, the wet site paradigm. The discovery of the engineered island at Karnak demands a new approach for archaeologists, the wet site paradigm. For decades, archaeology in Egypt focused on the high, dry ground, the desert edge, the pyramids, the tombs, because these areas preserve stone structures and organic remains well. And the Nile flood plain itself was largely ignored due to the difficulty of excavation, high water table, thick silt, and the belief that the architecture began at the foundations. The Karnak findings demonstrate that the subsurface hydrology of the floodplain is an integral part of the temple's plan. Future archaeological work must integrate geoarchaeology as a primary, not secondary tool for every major temple site. Paleo-hydrology, to map ancient Nile courses and channels. Preservation science, to deal with waterlogged or highly saturated organic remains, which can often preserve wood, textiles and plants far better than dry sand. The quiet architecture of the water holds the key to the deepest levels of ancient Egyptian religious thought. The ground beneath the temple is not passive dirt, it is an active component of the theological structure. To understand the stones, we must first understand the water that framed them. The sacred island of Karnak is the opening of a new, watery chapter in the history of Egyptology. The sands still hold their silence. How extensive were these channels? How often were they wet? Where did the water come from in low Nile years? Future seasons of geoarchaeology, more cores, more radar, more modeling, will answer. But the outline is here. Karnak, islanded by intention, a holy geography where land and water partnered to call the gods. Unanswered questions, the hydraulic complexity. While the evidence for a sacred island is compelling, the full hydraulic system of Karnak remains a subject of ongoing research, presenting complex and fascinating open questions for future expeditions. The full extent and connectivity of the channels. How many channels and basins define the sacred island? Was it fully encircled during the High Nile, or was it a peninsula connected by multiple smaller, controlled streams? Where exactly were the main sluice and control points that regulated the water level? We have strong evidence for the western and southern boundaries, the Opet Canal and the Ishiru, but the northern and eastern boundaries require more extensive GPR mapping to confirm a full encirclement. The water source during low Nile years. The annual Nile inundation guaranteed high water for a few months, perfect for the Opet Festival. But what happened during the other half of the year, particularly during a low Nile period? Shemu. The sacred lake of Amun was lined and deep, suggesting a stable water source. Was this source a deep spring, a groundwater well maintained by the priests, or was a specific feeder canal kept open and perpetually dredged at immense cost? The answer is critical, as the daily ritual of priestly ablution and the smaller bark ceremonies required water year-round. The date of peak hydraulic engineering. The Karnak complex evolved over 1,500 years. Was the sacred island concept implemented fully during the Middle Kingdom, or did it reach its zenith during the New Kingdom under the great builder pharaohs like Thutmose III, Amenhotep III, and Rameses II? The most robust evidence dates to the New Kingdom, coinciding with the rise of the Amun priesthood's power. Pinpointing the exact pharaoh who perfected the system would link the hydraulic design to a specific political and theological moment in Egyptian history. The presence of associated structures. If the water was used for ritual barks and ceremonies, there must have been docking facilities, marinas, and boathouses, designed to handle the massive, fragile wooden ships. Where were these located? Finding the foundations of these structures would further confirm the use of the surrounding water for navigation and ritual, solidifying the idea of an island with its own port network. The ongoing work involves archaeologists, geologists, and ancient historians working side by side, analyzing the chemical composition of the buried silts, testing the water-retaining properties of the ancient fill, and feeding this data into increasingly sophisticated 3D topographical and hydrological models. Each core sample and radar image is a piece of the puzzle, confirming that the ground beneath Karnak is the second silent inscription of the priests of Amun, a testament to a world where faith was not just believed, but built into the very earth. Karnak's stones tell us what was built. The ground beneath tells us why. If the priests of Thebes shaped an island for the gods, then Egypt's greatest temple wasn't just a building. It was a living ceremony. What do you think? Was Karnak truly an engineered island of sanctity? Or are we reading too much into lakes and channels? Tell me your theory in the comments. If this journey through hidden Egypt opened your eyes, subscribe to Golden Civilizations. Next, we'll decode another sacred machine of the ancient world.